All right, everybody, welcome back to Lords. That's right, we're here. And, last time I got my test results back, and it turns out it's true. My name is Tommy Two Tits after all. This boy doesn't have to get a mastectomy. Remember, even men can get breast cancer, so check for lumps, everybody. Alrighty. That's not what we talked about last week. We talked about Zelda. I don't know what you're talking about.
But I'm glad.
Oh, yeah. No, thank you guys so much. I mean, you guys gave me an opportunity here, too, and it could pay off the insurance. I mean, you just paid for it. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. We try to make sure everyone's taken care of.
Everyone check for lumps every day.
Yeah, it's true. Tommy Two Tits, it gets to remain Two Tits, So
because he was proactive and checked for lumps.
It's true. My mom taught me it could attack anyone.
It's true, Tommy. Now, thank you so much for this intro. What are we talking about today?
I don't fucking know, Atlas. What do you got?
Today, we're going back into the world of nonfiction with a kind of fictitious, potentially fictitious, little bit of mystical twist to the events. Slightly inspired by you playing Total War Rome 2 as Egypt. I had recently had this story. I have heard this story before a little bit. I hadn't looked into it a lot, but the story I'm going to go over today I have heard before, and it was recently brought back into my life by another podcast I listened to, which is one of the sources for this episode, was a Chilumani podcast. I also used the Wikipedia article, and I also watched a National Geographic documentary on the subject of today's talk. It's not going to probably be as long. I only have 5 pages of notes as opposed to 12, like Final Fantasy.
I mean, we could still elaborate on stuff, and I like
exactly
Egyptian things. So.
I also got I got some posts, some little epilogue stuff I can kind of go into after the main bit's done. Are you ready to jump into it?
Please do.
Alrighty. So, today, we're talking about, as you can see the title of the episode, The Resurrected Girl. This is a true story I would like to bring out. This is a real thing that happened. But you have to take some bits, especially this beginning, with a grain of salt, because it starts in 1904, and doctors weren't the best in 1904, especially in England in 1904. I guess it was actually, it's 1907 when it happened. Because in 1904 is when the subject of our story today, Dorothy Eady, was born in London. Her parents were a master tailor in Woolwich named Reuben Eady, and his wife Carolyn Mary Eady, known by Frost. I tried to look into that, and I don't know why her mom went by the nickname Frost.
Was she a frost demon?
I guess, or maybe she that doesn't sound like a good nickname. That sounds like it's got negative attached. That's a negative. Are you a cold woman? I don't know.
I know.
But she was their only child, and they were born in London, but they moved to a small coastal town to raise her. Dad brought the business and everything. Perfectly normal childhood until the age of 3, when tragedy struck and Dorothy fell down a flight of stairs in their home.
Jesus.
There is 2 versions of what was found when Dorothy was recovered. One is by the parent and one is by the doctor. The parent said that her head was a bloody mess atop her head when they picked her up, and she was twitching, and they called a doctor, and she calmed her down and stopped twitching, pretty much stopped moving by the time the doctor got there. When the doctor got there, his report said that her skull was split in half, and you could see the brain. I don't think that's true. I think he's overreacting. I think she just because she was a little girl, probably with big hair, a lot of hair, you know what I mean? So I think it was just bloody in her hair, and she did hurt her head. Regardless, the doctor did everything he could, but pronounced her dead on the spot because she was unresponsive, limp, and not breathing. The parents went in and started crying and grieving their dead daughter, who was only 3 years old, left to start making plans. The doctor left to get a coroner. About an hour later, the doctor receives a messenger saying to come back to the house as soon as possible, and he does. And the reason why is because when the parents went back into the room, their daughter was gone because she was outside in the backyard playing.
Okay.
As if nothing had happened. She was declared dead. An hour later, she's back up in the outside playing like a normal little girl. They call her name. She runs inside. But she wasn't quite the same. Her head wasn't even that wounded, apparently. Like, after that. Like, she had a little bit of blood. They cleaned her head up. That was it. No scar. But the biggest change was that she had a different accent. This is called foreign accent syndrome. I don't know if you've heard of it before.
I have heard of that, yeah.
Yeah, it's a normal thing when people get head injuries. Sometimes they speak in different accents. And she was speaking English, but the accent was a little weird. Some people said it sounded a little familiar, but nothing that people really knew. But it wasn't an English-speaking accent. And her parents would find her hiding and crying around different parts of the house, asking to be brought home.
What the fuck?
And keep in mind, she's 3 years old. And she was having extremely vivid dreams of being home in a large area, which was a huge garden with big columns all around her. That's how she described it later in life.
What the fuck?
The next big thing that happened in her life was at Sunday school. This is 1907. Keep in mind, she's still 3.
Yeah.
In Sunday school, her teachers requested her parents keep her away from class because she was saying Christianity was wrong.
Oh, Jesus.
That was the first event. That was all. She said it was wrong. She said it sounded wrong and it doesn't seem right. That's what she kept saying in class. And so she was basically taken out of Sunday school. The next thing that happened, which is big, and this is the first big beginning of the story, is when she was age 4. So next year, 1908, her parents took her to the British Museum in London. And Dorothy felt bored of the museum, like a 4-year-old would. Following the parents around like a good kid, didn't misbehave, was being good. But then everything changed when they entered the Egyptian exhibit. Dorothy saw the sculptures and began hugging them and kissing their feet. She absorbed a photograph of temples in the New Kingdom exhibits and started screaming out, "There's home. Why can't I go back home? Why I need to be here? There's home. Where are the trees and where's the garden?"
What the fuck?
So the parents are pretty concerned at this point. It's like, what the hell is wrong with our kid? The photo she was looking at was a photo of the temple of Sety I. Sety I is a pharaoh who's pretty much only known for being the father of Ramses the Great.
Right.
Dorothy was obsessed with the British Museum at that point. Another thing that happened is she got officially kicked out of Sunday school because she would compare Christianity with the heathen ancient religion, quote unquote, of Egypt.
Wow.
Soon after, she was expelled from her Dulwich Girls' School for refusing to sing a hymn that the lyrics called God to, quote unquote, curse and thwart the Egyptians.
Yeah, well, that's in the Bible.
Yeah, so she refused to say that. She got kicked out of school. She was obsessed, and this is the next, 5 or 6 years, she just kept going back to that museum at every opportunity she could. She would just spend her whole days in the Egyptian section. Eventually she met with a man named E.A. Wallace Budge, who's he's like a controversial figure nowadays, but back then was known as one of the fathers of Egyptology. What he is known for, though, is he's the best. He was the first person to kind of decipher hieroglyphs.
Oh, wow.
And he started teaching Dorothy how to do that because she was obsessed with it, and he ended up knowing her. And she was like, "Well, if you're so into this, I'll teach you how to do it for free." So she would just learn how to study hieroglyphs from there.
Oh shit.
Next major event. Some years later, around the age of 10 to 13, she had a near escape with a German bombing raid during the First World War. This prompted her family to send her to Sussex to live with her grandmother, which was a big deal to her because she couldn't go to the Museum of London anymore.
Right.
But when in Sussex, she continued to study ancient Egypt at the Eastbourne Public Library, and it is here where she has seen this photo, which I'm going to put on screen. I'm not going to keep it on screen because it's kind of gross. That is a picture of Sety I. He is the most well-preserved mummy to this day. So
wow,
he
looks good.
She saw that photo. Obviously, it was black and white. And when she was looking at that photo, she immediately recognized that was Pharaoh Sety I. And then soon after that, at the age of 15, she had a dream where she would have sexual relations with the mummy of Sety I. So that happened when she was 15. She was having sex dreams with a mummy. And her behavior would often feature sleepwalking and nightmares after that dream. which would lead her to multiple incarcerations at sanatoriums around the area.
Oh, shit.
Yep, she'd break into places in her sleep. At the age of 16, she left school and spent her time visiting the museums and archaeological sites around Britain, facilitated by her father, who had just begun working in the cinema industry, which had just kind of taken off after the World War. Edie would become a part-time student at Plymouth Art School and begin collecting affordable Egyptian antiquities. During her period at the school, she joined a theater group that occasionally performed a play based on the story of Isis and Osiris. She would take the role of Isis, and she sang the lamentation of Osiris' death. And she was apparently said to do it very naturally in the native Egyptian tongue.
Wow. That's pretty wild.
Years later, when she was 27, so we're skipping ahead a lot. Nothing really happened then, I'm guessing. Nothing. I couldn't find anything in that period of her life. I'm guessing she just lived a relatively normal teen life for someone who was obsessed with Egypt. When she was 27, she began working in London with an Egyptian public relations magazine, for which wrote articles and drew cartoons that reflected her political support for independent Egypt. And if you're not aware, at this time, Egypt was a territory of the United Kingdom.
Yes.
So it was not its own country. And during this time, she met a man named Iman Abdel Meguid. I hope I said that correctly. He's an Egyptian student with who was learning English there to teach English in Egypt, and he moved back to Egypt eventually, and she kept in contact with him. And then finally, in 1931, she ended up moving to Egypt and married Iman, who taught her, who was teaching English. And when she arrived, it is said she kissed the ground and shouted out loud, "I have come home to stay."
Jesus.
They lived in Cairo, and they even had a kid pretty shortly after they got married. And can you guess what they named the kid?
Ramsey?
Sety.
Sety,
Close.
that makes sense. Close.
So her son was named Sety, but spelled with a Y, so different than with an I.
Right.
I have a picture of Dorothy here from that time period. That's her.
Pretty wild.
When she moved to Egypt. So that's a 1931 photograph of Dorothy. She's a pretty good-looking lady, nice English lady. During her early period there, she reported a nighttime visitation by an apparition of Hor-Ra.
Wow.
So Hor-Ra, in the mythology of Egypt, is the combination of Horus and Ra, which is, there's so many different takes on Egyptian mythology, but
Sure.
it's commonly seen that Hor-Ra at some point in their religion kind of merged together as one figure. And he was said to have told her slowly over 12 months the story of her previous life, where she now believes she is a reincarnation of a priestess of Isis named Beth Reshet.
Jesus.
Which means harp of joy in Egyptian, which apparently she would have no way of knowing at that time. And in her diary, she wrote the whole story of this person who was described as being an individual of humble upbringings, with a mother who was a vegetable seller and a father who was a soldier during the reign of Sety I, sometime between 1290 BCE and 1279 BCE. When she was 3 years old, her mother died, and she was placed in the temple of Qam el Sultan because her father could not afford to raise her on a basic soldier's salary. Beth Reshet was then raised as a priestess, and when she was 12 years old, the high priestess asked her if she wished to go out into the world or stay and become a consecrated virgin. The 12-year-old girl knew nothing about the outside world and decided to stay and took the vows of the consecrated virgin. During the next 2 years, she learned her role in the annual drama of Osiris' Passion and Resurrection, which is where that song she sang earlier apparently naturally comes from. A role that only virgin priestesses consecrated to Isis could perform. During the time of Sety I, during this time, Sety I visited the temple to watch the play and apparently spoke with her, and they quickly became lovers. And she would, one of my new favorite phrases I learned, eat the uncooked goose with Sety I, which is a term basically meaning adultery.
Eat the uncooked goose.
Yes, I think it's like eating the forbidden fruit.
Yeah.
I think it's the same idea.
Pounding the mayonnaise.
Yeah, exactly. Stuff in the clam. Anyway,
Sorry, it's been a while since I made a joke. I had to kick in somewhere. Go
Beth Hachette became pregnant with Sety the first child, told the high priest. The high priest said the offense of adultery with a pharaoh against Isis is so terrible that the only option is death if she were to go to trial. And instead of causing a public scandal, she went into the temple and committed suicide.
Sheesh.
So that's her story. There is no historical evidence to back up the life of Beth Hachette, but there wouldn't be regardless if it's real or not. It's just a priestess in Egypt, 3,000 years ago. Over 2,000 years ago. There'd be no documentation of that.
Yeah. Priestess killed herself. Shit.
Yeah, I mean, the only way I could think of there being any history for that to prove would be if Sety had impregnated a woman and cared. Which he probably didn't even know,
Fair.
that she was pregnant at that time. But the next time we checked back in with Dorothy was 1935, and she got separated from her husband after 4 years.
Rough.
Which is a pretty big deal, I feel like, in the 30s.
Oh yeah.
And the reason why they separated is because he took a job teaching English in Iraq, and she didn't want to move to Iraq. She was never going to leave Egypt, so they divorced. But her son Sety stayed with her, and she raised her son. 2 years after their marriage broke down, she went to live in Nalzat al-Saman, which is a small town right near the pyramids of Egypt, in Giza, where she met an Egyptian archaeologist named Salim Hassan, who was in charge of the Department of Antiquities. She took a job with him and became his secretary and draft woman.
Wow.
So basically she was not only a secretary, but she was a record keeper.
I bet she loved that.
Yeah, so her whole job now was just being surrounded by ancient Egyptian stuff. And according to the workers at the time, she was a huge help with their scholars, especially when it came to correcting English. And she would write English articles for them, so she would take their Egyptian and just translate it.
Wow, that's
and
cool.
very soon, this poorly educated woman, she dropped out of high school at 16. That was like her last real school.
Yeah.
And she became a first-rate Egyptian scholar. She was proficient at writing in Egyptian and hieroglyphs. She produced many articles, essays, monographs, and books that, according to reviews at the time, were of great range, wit, and substance.
Damn.
So she basically just made herself into this very important figure. I took this picture too up.
That is pretty amazing, actually, because she literally became important to Egypt, just like she was in her previous life. Like she was, you know what I mean? Even more important, I'd argue, than her alleged priestess life.
And basically fully self-made. Like she didn't.
Yeah.
Like she dropped out of high school. She went to she did go to a college in Plymouth, but for drama. Like she was in an acting troupe. She didn't do any writings teach. She didn't go to writing school or learn how to write, but she became like a professional essay writer and monograph writer on Egypt.
Man, Egypt's got a lot of stories like that.
Yeah, it's a crazy place, and Egyptology is a crazy field. It's a whole other world to delve into of corruption and fake history and refusing to change the history that we've proven wrong. It's a wild rabbit hole, but that's not what we're talking about today. Today we're talking about Dorothy Eady because her story's wild, and it's going to get wilder as time goes on. As we go through this, weirdly enough, it does get crazier. So Dorothy had made such big significance to this Department of Antiquities under the work of Hassan that when he died, she got employed by Ahmed Fakhri, who was basically the biggest archaeologist in Egypt at the time. During his investigations at Dashur, which to this day is pretty much the most prolific Egyptian dig. That's where they dug up most of these mummies were seen around the pyramids during this time because of this dig. Wow. So many artifacts were found, and she was there the whole time.
Is this like when The Mummy, the movie, takes place around that time?
Basically, yeah, because this would be about 20 years after, because that was during the First World War.
Right.
Or maybe it was just after the First World War, but it's around the same time. This was when the Egypt dig time was at an all-time high.
All right, yeah, because I remember that was early 1900s. Was that?
1930s
There's
or
so
late
much
20s.
here, holy shit!
Yeah, because it hadn't been touched yet, and there was no they were able to go climb the pyramids. It wasn't protected.
My dad did that, by the way.
That's insane.
My dad climbed the pyramid with his friend, and they got in trouble with the Egyptian police. And but then he just gave him a Boston Red Sox hat, and he was like, "All right."
He gave him a what?
a Boston Red Sox hat because he wanted it because he's like, hey, give me a Red Sox hat, like, because they knew about it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, he didn't really care. He just wasn't supposed to.
Do you know what year that was?
That was maybe 1970.
Okay.
Or maybe sometime in 1970.
Yeah, because I was looking this up because I saw that they talk about in her story like her climbing up the pyramids. And I was like, when did they like not let people do that? And it wasn't until the 80s that it was like walled and like enforced. So like even the 70s,
I went in the 90s. So
that's
I was technically the 2000s when I went.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Where was I? What was I? I lost this. Oh, I found it. The Dashur digs, huge deal, big stuff. She was there the whole time. And Hassan wrote a book called The Excavations of Giza. And in this book, it gives special mention and the sincere gratitude to Dorothy Eady for editing, drawing, indexing, and proofreading all the work for this book. So that's written in the book there. And during this whole time, during all this working, she would pray and make frequent offerings to the different gods of Egypt. And she would often spend the night inside the Great Pyramid. So she basically had a room in the pyramid, like in the Great Pyramid itself. She would go in there and had like a little chamber where she had a bedroll and she would sleep in it.
That's fucking wild.
She became the object of village gossip because of her nighttime prayers and offerings to Horus and the Great Sphinx. But at the same time, she was heavily respected because she was extremely honest about not hiding her true faith to ancient Egyptian gods. And while Egypt was a Muslim country at this time, there was still kind of a I don't know if paganism is the correct word, but there was like a kind of a group of people who did worship these old gods still, and they're still around today. But it was a bit more like prevalent, but also more hidden back then because they couldn't really talk about it. So she was on the first team to be open about it, and honestly, because she was a white person, they didn't want to kill her. You know what I mean?
Oh,
so
wow.
they didn't want to like move her. They didn't want to make a deal out of it. So it's kind of like there was heavy Muslim religious activists back then in Egypt specifically because they were kind of trying to fight for independence.
Right.
And they left her alone because of the press of killing an English woman would be bad. That's what the village gossip was back then, at least. How true that was, I don't know. That's just what I could find.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
honestly,
it does make sense. It's just like she was kind of left alone because she was, this weird archaeologist. They thought,
yeah.
I don't know.
Just let her dig her.
Yeah, let her
dig
do
up her rocks,
her
and
weird offerings and live in the pyramid, I guess.
Yeah, she's not hurting anybody. Like,
people also respected her though because she did fast during Ramadan, and she did celebrate Christmas with the Christians who lived there. So she was open to everything.
So so she was again. She like, well, I mean, it honestly like, she really lived a life of she seems like she tried to live that life of like an Egyptian, like high royal something or other, like. Just like she eats with the people, she's kind to everybody, she helps everybody, she's but in a modern time it's obviously strange. But if she did all of these things that she's doing back then, it would be normal. It would be it would be seen as pragmatic and like and that of a leader and that of like of Egyptian especially like in the terms of religion.
Yeah, she was very open about it too, which is a big thing. Like she was openly supporting world religions, which is, if you remember her as a kid getting kicked out of school for not being friendly with Christianity. Yeah. A bit different as an adult, which is good. She grew up. She wasn't fighting it. She also worked with the workers a lot. Like she would move equipment around. She would help like physically dig the areas out. And it gave her a lot of firsthand experience with the contemporary Egyptian life. And this was when she basically made this big realization that throughout all of history, from the Pharaonic ages, the Greco-Roman ages, the Christian and Islamic, the one thing that really connected all of Egypt was the Nile. And she decided basically she wants to spend the rest of her life living on the Nile and throughout it. Wow. And the next big event that would happen was 1956 when the Ahmed Fakhri's Dashur Pyramid Project was terminated because it stopped coming out with artifacts. They basically dug up all they could. And she was left unemployed. And Fakhri gave her a suggestion that she climb the Great Pyramid, and when you reach the top, turn west and address yourself to Lord Osiris and ask him Quo Vadi, which is the Latin phrase for which way are we marching.
Right.
She did it, and he then offered her two choices. You can have a well-paid job at the record offices in Cairo, or you can be paid poorly and be a draftswoman again in the city of Abydos. Or Abydos? Was it?
Abydos?
Abydos? Yeah, I think that's how you say it. Abydos. And, of course, she chose the latter, to be a poorly paid draftswoman in Abydos. And she reported back to Fakhri that Sety I approached her in a dream and approved of her going there, claiming that the wheel of fate was turning and this would be the time of her testing. And if she was chaste, she would now undo Benthrishists, I think that's how you say their previous name. She would undo her ancient sin.
Jeez.
So, no pressure. And in March 3rd, 1956, she was now 52 years old, mind you. She left for Abydos, and she set up her home in Arebet Abydos, which is the village there, which sits in the cradle of the mountain of Pega the Gap, which ancient Egyptians believed was the mountain that led to the path of Amenti, which is their afterlife.
Wow, that's spooky.
So here is where she began to go by the name she'd be known as. If you want to look up Dorothy, this is what you search: the name Sety, because in that village it is customary for villagers to refer to a mother by the name of their eldest child, which is Sety, and means mother, so she went by Sety from here on out. That's her name. Dorothy Edie's gone, Sety's here. Anything she'd be accredited by officially would be under the name Sety.
Wow.
And Abydos had great significance to her because guess what? This is where Benthreshet lived, and this is where the Temple of Sety is. So, before even working here, she had made multiple pilgrimages to this site. She was never really allowed in because it was locked, and there was research ongoing, so she wasn't able to enter the temple at this point, which is important to note. She could not go inside yet, but now she's part of the project and could go inside. And on the first trip made there, she met the chief inspector of the antiquities department, who knew about her claims of past life and thought she was full of shit.
Well, yeah,
as anybody would, especially in 1956.
Yep.
And he decided he was going to test her. And her test was she asked her to enter the temple for the first time and unlock the door for her, and asked her to stand in the pitch black and describe the wall she was looking at. Because he was the only person who had been in there so far and hadn't published this yet. And guess what? She described it perfectly.
Jeez.
She knew exactly what the paintings were. She even went to incomplete ones and described them in ways that made sense to them being complete. The chief inspector was mind blown. And officially gave her a promotion on the spot to basically be lead archaeologist at the time of the place, without the title because she was a woman. So she still was she was still a draftswoman by title, but she was given a lot more reign and a lot more power around the temple.
That's wild.
And for the next 2 years, she would be translating pieces from the excavated temple, and her work is actually in the book, or in the monograph, I should say, by Edouard Gazuli, called The Palace and Magazine Attached to the Temple of Sety I at Abydos. I'm sure it's a very thrilling read, where he expresses particular thanks to Sety for her impressed skill and knowledge, and her knowledge of the temple and hieroglyphs. So that was basically him thanking her for doing what she did there. I think that's the same guy. I couldn't confirm if that was the guy who tested her or not, but I think it was. And she also decided to basically live in this temple. She set up a small room inside, and she felt safe there. In her journal, she mentioned that she was watched over by the benevolent eyes of Osiris and Isis in this temple. But there's something that we haven't talked about this whole time from the very beginning, which was that photo of home. And I have a photo of that right here. This is the photo of home that she was looking at. This is the photo she saw. Of course, it was black and white in an older photo. This is a modern photo of it. But this is the Temple of Sety that she is working at Abydos. And she said, "Where are the gardens?" And she never forgot where are the gardens because they weren't there. And you can see in the front, below those steps, where the stones are and this path.
Yeah.
When she went there, those steps were not there. That was all sand. It was all sand and rock that had formed over the years. And she had always claimed this temple had a garden when she first met Sety the First. She saw it in her dreams. And her descriptions as a child, everyone ignored. But with everything she has done so far, they said, fuck it, let's dig. And guess what they found?
They found gardens.
A full garden set up with planters, walkways, the pillars she described. That's what these ruins are outside those front pillars.
That's the craziest thing so far.
Yes,
that's the craziest
That's
thing.
the craziest point of this whole story. She knew exactly where they were. She was describing the walkways as they were digging, and they found them. So that is just insane that happened. I can't explain that.
I mean, there's a lot of fucking stuff that attaches to ancient Egypt when it comes to like heavy spiritual and like crazy extra dimensional kind of stuff.
Yeah, reincarnation is also like their thing. You know,
yeah,
like the phoenix is like one of their. That's Isis's whole thing is the phoenix, and she claimed she was a priestess of Isis.
Well, I find this very interesting. Is that like a lot of old pagan religions are kind of coming back in very interesting ways, where people are kind of starting to like, you know what I mean? I'm not to say like the old ancient, obviously in Egypt in this story's case, but also in like cases of Europe, like European traditions and stuff like that. You know, like a lot of old school things are coming back in a lot of old ways. And instead of taking over things like, you know, Islam and Christianity and stuff like that, which is really, really like saying something, is that like, I think, because I always had the theory that a lot of the older religions, including like Greek religion, you know, and Roman, you know, Zeus, Jupiter, such, like they were all always attached to more earthly things, you know what I mean? Like thunder, fire, war, aggression, like love, partying. That like there were so many gods of different things, and they had different purposes and stuff like that. And I always saw that as more like I don't prescribe to any particular spirituality or faith, but like I always saw those as kind of like that makes more sense to me than whatever the hell Christians. Not to no insult here to any Christians or anything like that listening, but like it's to me again, it's just like that makes more sense to me because it seems way more earthly and down to earth.
Yeah.
And so like
it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Because you see something like a massive thunderstorm, and you're living in a primitive society basically, or early, you know, civilization. Like people are curious and they want an explanation for it.
Yeah, you
exactly.
You
can't just figure out thunder, you know, or lightning. Like, the sky's exploding. That's cool.
I guess people might be fighting up there because otherwise I have no fucking idea what that could be. Like honestly, a lot of some of the biggest historical moments where Zeus was battling other gods was probably just big thunderstorms, and the bigger ones, they were like, that one dude's fighting Hades. Like,
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, which is really cool and great storytelling, I want to point out. But like, also great job on ancient Greeks for great storytelling. But like going back kind of to the story here, the resurrected girl, she bear in mind Egypt is also attached to the cradle of life because humans and humanity in general came from Africa. Mm-hmm. So like it's very like fair to guess that that's the area where we all kind of like have a genuine kind of connection to. And there's also been so many different things. I remember when I went to Egypt when I was 10 years old, I remember like walking around the pyramids with my grandmother, and there was this guy, like he looked like a little trinket seller kid guy, like he was peddling trinkets, you know.
Yeah.
And he was just following us around because we were Americans, so he's like, "You guys have money, buy stuff." And it was funny, but I thought it was funny, even though I was a 10-year-old. But my grandmother was like, "That's racist to assume that." And I was like, "Yeah, but we do have money." I was like, "We could buy something," but like he wanted us to buy these 3, and I have them in my living room. And I'll show them to you next time you come over. But I have these things in my living room. They're 3 black pyramids that have hieroglyphics on them. And he was like, here, buy these. They're really nice. Like, they'd be a great, like, little souvenir. And then my grandmother was like, oh, no, we're fine. And he had, like, an offering price. I don't remember this, obviously, because the details are way too specific. But, like, we'll just say, like, he was offering, like, $10. $10, and I'll sell them to you, $10. And my grandma's like, no, I'm not going to do it. We tried walking away. He comes up and follows us again. He's like, fine, $5. Basically, my grandma's like, no. Fucking please leave us alone. And then he's just kind of like, a buck. Give me a buck. And she's like, fine. So she gives him a buck, and we take the pyramid. And he like, I remember, like, looking down, kind of admiring them for a second, looking up, and the dude was just fucking gone. Like, and it was one of those things where, like, to me as a kid, and bear in mind, I'm a 10-year-old me. I'm already a very, like, sort of, like, I have a big imagination, that kind of thing. But, like, to me, as a kid, it just seemed like he wanted to get rid of them more than he wanted to make a buck. Like, he seemed like he was way less interested in making money, and he was more interested in getting rid of those things. And my grandma was just like, the person to annoy. Like, and so, like, and I've had them ever since. But, like, I don't know. It's always been a really cool thing, and I've always been really suspicious of something like that, and like, I carry them with me as a sign of, like, I shouldn't ditch them, because I think that would be probably worse. Like, if there is something attached to it, or to me, I'm like, well, like, or maybe if I understand or read them or something like that. But I don't know. That was never been my. I did try to decipher some things a couple times, but I got so confused, I kind of quit. But
hieroglyphics are not easy.
No, it's not.
If you're not being taught by an Egyptologist from age 10, it's hard to understand it all.
I can imagine. It's like a language plus music theory at the same time. Like, but no, I always just thought that I've always had a love for ancient Egypt. I remember at the Museum of Science a couple of years later, so when I was in middle school or high school, they had an Egypt exhibits, and also like special, films, like documentaries about Egypt and stuff like that. And one of them was about curses and stuff like that. And everybody should know this, like, Egyptians were big on traps. They fucking loved their booby traps. That's not like a lie. Mm-hmm. That's not Indiana Jones joking around about and dicking around. No, that's true. They really did. Like, in the pyramids, they had false caverns that if you went down the wrong way, you would literally never come out. Like sometimes you'd fall in a spike pit or something. That's true too. Sometimes you just get sealed in. Like, that was something that happened too, is that, like, if you go into the wrong room, a stone slab would just stuck, and that's it. Like, you're just in there now. You die of starvation or something, or lack of oxygen, whatever comes first. But, like, so, there were always those kinds of things. And I remember also another detail about when I was in Egypt was there was, like, this, because they bear in mind, they still had, like, tons of stuff that they were, like, smaller things around the area that they could still, like, access and all that, like smaller tombs and stuff. I actually crawled into one.
You crawled into a tomb?
Yeah.
Oh.
I crawled in. There was a little crawl space, and my mom or dad, I forget if I was with my mom or my dad, but they were like, I don't know. And I was like, it's fine. And this other guy was down there already, and he was like, because he was working down there, he was like, he was preserving it. He was basically like a ranger or park preserver type situation. He's like, no, it's fine. The kids love coming down here. So I guess, I wasn't the first, obviously, but, like, it was one of those things where, like, we come down and, like, there were literally two gigantic, I mean, well, I was a kid, so they were probably not as big as I'm remembering them, but, like, I mean, they were probably still pretty fucking big. Two gigantic, like, stone, not like sarcophaguses, because obviously those are like ornaments and stuff, but
I know what you're talking about. They're where a body was.
Yeah, where, like, they'd put the sarcophagus,
yeah,
because, like, the stone, like, so there's a bunch of that, and there were also, like, and he's like, do you want to look in it? And I was like, why? And he's like, look, we don't always take everything out. And I looked in, and there were, like, it looked like they were, like, still old, very ancient bones in there and stuff too. I don't, they may have been just fucking around with the kids, but, like, at the same time, it was one of those things that was very wild. Again, I was a 10-year-old too. I wasn't totally dumb, like, but I was very inquisitive, and I wanted to know more and stuff. And he goes like, yeah, he just told me that was a place where like, people who served the temples, because it was close to the Sphinx, by the way, where okay. I was.
Right.
If you want to know exactly where I was, where I went into this thing, it was in front of the Sphinx. He said, and he was saying that, like, oh, this is probably where, like, this is likely where people have, like, who just served by that area and maintained the area and that kind of thing. That's where they were. So, which is pretty wild. So that could have just been like a burial area for people who served, and took care of the Sphinx and the pyramids or whatever, attendants maybe.
Yeah, because they would be honored for that's like a sacred duty. So they would get
exactly.
buried like that for sure.
Yeah, they wouldn't be buried in just like a miscellaneous pit, but they're not quite, big tomb level. But they're in like
they're not. They're not going to be. They're probably not going to be mummies, but they're going to be. They'll be buried. In a little sarcophagus. Maybe probably unmarked, but they're there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, which was pretty fucking wild, And it was one of those things, and that's why when you told me we had to do with like ancient Egypt. I was excited when it turned into like a what the fuck story, because I'm like, dude, no, because like there's so many of those types of stories. There's stories about like there was like an archaeologist company that went into a tomb once, and it was said that the tomb was cursed in some way, and they were like, whatever, like we're gonna find stuff. They went in, they came out, and slowly and steadily things kept happening to them. The first thing that happened was one of them had a pet parrot, and it died.
I've heard a few stories from Egypt of people doing that.
Yeah, and so, and there's some assumptions that like in there were still toxic fumes and gas that eventually affected everybody, and then like and that could have been it too. But there's also the likelihood that there's something else shenanigans going on. I don't know.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of stories of they had pressure plate traps set up with gas, and the gas had expired, so it wasn't deadly, but it would still cause a lot of ill effects.
Yeah,
because it's just been sitting there in chambers for thousands of years, and the gas is just stuck in stone. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, it just changes over time. Like time makes a chemical change, but and but then like he'd go home, and then he would come in contact with his parrot, and then his parrot would just die because it was a smaller immune system and couldn't take whatever that was, and then But there's like so many wild stories like that, and like. But there's also things that just it doesn't allow you to go further. I mean, I remember going to Petra as well, which is one of the crazy things because that's one of the earliest,
Yeah, that's earlier than the Old Kingdom, I think.
Yeah, it is. And I remember going because I remember walking through the canyon and actually seeing the the iconic Petra wall, the front wall with like the opening,
the one that
and stuff.
you see.
Yeah, like I remember walking into that and being like, or walking to that and going through it and being like, this is wild. But like, it was funny because like part of me was thinking like. And again, I was a kid. I was a 10-year-old kid, but there was like a huge part of me that was going like equal parts going, I should be here right now and I shouldn't be here right now. Like I had this weird like instinct, like cuz I'm as you know, this is just me as a person. I'm an instinct thinker. I oftentimes not that I'm not a logical thinker. I can be logical obviously, but oftentimes I just go off of my instinct, I go off my gut. And most of the time I'm right. But like, it was one of those times where like my instinct was going haywire in both, like, it was like the radar was spinning in circles. You know what I mean? Like, like I couldn't quite get a peg. I couldn't quite peg what I was feeling and what I was supposed to be feeling. And like, I was too young to comprehend. And I remember being there and being like, what, this is weird. And then when I went, and then again, the same feeling happened when we were in Egypt. And like, and I still kind of carry that feeling every time I touch or like pick up or like look at those little pyramids that are sitting on the bar in the living room right now. Like,
your voice is getting like a little cutting. It's cutting out a bit on Discord. I think you need to lower your detect. It looks like your Discord's like not picking it up. I think you need to lower your input sensitivity in the voice and video settings.
Oh no, okay, I can do that.
Yeah, it's an easy. I would just slide the bar down more.
Oh wow, yeah, holy shit! It's at max. I'll put it. What is that? 72%. How's that? Is that better?
No, I think you changed your volume. Below that is input sensitivity. Your volume was good.
Oh, I have automatic sensitivity.
Yeah, I would lower that. Take off automatic and lower it a little bit.
All right, yeah, okay, I lowered it.
I was noticing your voice was cutting out and your Discord green light was going off.
Ah, okay. I apologize. Thank you for picking that up.
It sounds fine. You're not cutting out. So I think that was it.
All right, cool. Maybe, hey, it could have been other things too. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is like, I've always had this fascination with ancient Egypt. I am the most skeptical person when it comes to mysticism and magic because as a kid growing up, I wanted to believe in those things because because my parents didn't want to really influence certain things with me, and I love my parents very much, but I definitely think they kind of like. I almost feel like I was an experiment sometimes, because they didn't tell me certain things, or they wouldn't do certain things, or they wouldn't influence me in certain ways. Like when I asked them to stop going to church, they just said yeah. They said okay without any real like. They didn't ask me why. They just said okay, yeah, we don't have to go to church anymore. And I went, oh, okay. I remember making a big deal. I remember when I not worked up the courage to ask them. They were like,
I was just gonna say, I bet you were like a nervous kid. Like I don't want to. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to offend them. And they're like, oh yeah, I don't care. I don't care. You're good.
Yeah, they're like, fine. We don't have to wake up early on Sundays now. Great. Like my dad's like, I wake up early every fucking day for work. I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
And my justification though I remember was because I still laugh about it to this day was I don't need a book to tell me not to be a bad person, or an old book to tell me not to be a bad person.
Which I feel like for most people, I really hope is the case.
Yeah, that's basically like how I felt, and my parents looked at each other and kind of shrugged. Although don't get me wrong, I did have some shitty things I did in my teenage years. You know, none of us are proud of our teenagers. But I grew out of the bad phases and stuff of life. But
and I don't think reading a book would have changed that.
I don't think that is the case either.
An old book.
Yeah. But I do have a lot of superstition towards ancient and old school ideology and mysticism and stuff. Like when somebody tells me about how God made the world, I go, okay. or like when somebody's just kind of like, maybe Harry Potter magic's real. I'm like, oh, you know what I mean? Like maybe the Force. Like I know that sounds mean, but like that's just kind of it's just kind of truth. But when it comes down to stuff that's existed for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, it does lead somebody to believe that, like, okay, because, like, I'm not... Because I think it can be, by the way, I think it can be eventually... all of it can be explained with science. I think we can eventually explain things with science. I just think we haven't gotten there yet. I don't think it's necessarily, like, magic, quote, unquote, but I think science is kind of magic, to be honest. Like,
well, I mean, honestly, I've said it before. The quote from the first Thor movie says it best, where just magic is science you haven't understand it. You don't understand yet.
Yeah, I thought that was the second one.
No, it's the first one.
Okay, it's the first one. I do love that quote, though.
It's the standing under the moonlit night with Natalie Portman on top of the roof.
Oh, right. Oh, it's true, though. Oh, that is a nice scene. That's a good scene.
Yeah,
I like
it's a very good line because it is very true. It's just anyone that says, oh, it's impossible, it's impossible. It's like they said flight was impossible 100 years ago.
Yeah, it's true.
And I mean, look at us now. Like, you know what I mean? Like, no one would have thought, like, oh, I'm going to send a written letter to someone and they're going to respond in seconds.
Yeah.
Across the world.
And you know, it's funny, like, I have a very loose ideology and spirituality, but one of my things is, and this actually comes into, by the way, the entire story you told tonight totally folds into kind of my belief system. I don't believe in an afterlife, just heaven, hell. I think those are just manipulation tactics to control the masses. To be honest, I know that sounds very, like, conspiracy theorist.
How
but, like,
edgy.
I know, but I really do believe that. I'm like, I think heaven and hell were designed to be like, if you're a good boy and girl, you'll go to heaven when you die. Oh my God, shut up! Like it's like, or like a parental tactic. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, it's kind of like
it makes
that.
sense. It makes sense.
But I do believe that, you know, I don't necessarily believe that when you die, like we were joking when we were playing Hell Let Loose, and I was like, yeah, it's just like real life death, and you just get hit. It's just blackness, nothing.
It's blackness, nothing left. Nope, just pit of misery.
Yeah, there's no the time is an illusion. It's gone. Like I think because and this is just general. This is something I talk about often. Is my spirituality, if you want to call it that, quote unquote, has always been energy. I know that sounds very cheesy, but I just believe in energy. The energy that powers our computers, along with the energy that powers us as people. You know what I mean? Like we need food, we need sunlight, we need water, we need all of these different things to help life grow and stuff like that. And all of these ancient religions also simultaneously worship these facets. So it's like, to me, it's very connected. And when it comes down to like reincarnation and that subject matter, I believe, one of the things that I believe, and it's a very cheap way of saying it, it's a very cheesy way of saying it, and I can dive in deeper, is human beings and life in general is the universe experiencing itself. Like it's consciousness. That's what consciousness is. It is the universe experiencing itself. Because a planet doesn't necessarily have a consciousness that we know of. A sun doesn't that we know of. But yet we do that we know of. Like, so it's kind of this feeling of like, oh, we get to be the ones to pick the universe apart, molecule by molecule, to understand the universe for, again, the universe. Like, and to me, like when we die,
that energy gets released, but everything that we leave behind, plus something I think a little extra, gets released along with it. And to me, the idea that there's this wild fucking chance that something from ancient times came back and literally like possessed this girl. Like I'm like, yeah, there's like a, to me, I'm like, there's a 0.01% chance, you know, that absolutely is what happened. Like, yeah. Otherwise, it could be just a really good actress, you know, planted a lot of really convenient, did a little bit of digging herself the night before and found the pathway and went, ooh, I'm right. You know what I mean? Maybe, you know, it could have been that. But at the same time, it could have been also, yeah, a consciousness. Because again, consciousness doesn't necessarily mean ghost or spirit. It could just mean once you die, that's what gets released into the ether, so to speak. And there's nothing to say that a consciousness can't come back, you know, because there's stories like that throughout history. I mean, even with things like phasmophobia, we talk about ghosts that are, generally speaking, other consciousness.
I have a part of my life obsessed with ghosts. And, I mean, it's very similar to kind of what you're saying. It's kind of something I've always thought of. Ever since I was a child, the idea of reincarnation made sense to me.
Yeah.
Or you just come back as something else. Like I remember thinking as a kid that's just how it worked. Before knowing what it meant, what the word was, I just thought if I died, I would come back as something else.
Yeah,
you know
that's kind of how it feels. Yeah.
It's
kind of like it almost feels like an instinct, doesn't it?
Yeah, like I instinctually just thought that, you know. Yeah. I was never scared of death when I found out about mortality as a child. You know, that never bothered me. Because to me, in my head, I was like, oh, I'll just come back as like a cat or something. You know what I mean? Or I'll just be another person, be born again, whatever.
How old were you when you had to cope with death?
I never had to. That's what I'm saying. Like, it never bothered me.
Oh,
the second I found out about it as a kid, I was like, well, it's not going to matter because I'll just come back.
Yeah, right. Okay, because I remember when I was 4 was when my grandfather died. 4 or 5. And I remember, because my mom still says this to me. It's kind of funny. She's like, oh, you don't remember that? I'm like, no, I do.
I remember you told this story before. Your mom refuses to believe you remember that?
Yeah. Like because I think she doesn't want to believe that her kid's a little traumatized. But I'm like, no. But to me, and now as an adult, I think it's good. I think it's as fucked up as it sounds. Good trauma. It's good to understand death. Maybe not that young, but like it's good to understand death. And a lot of kids understand death much younger than that.
I guess when I figured out about it was when my grandfather did die when I was 3 or 4. But so I guess similar situation. But I never knew my grandfather. He lived across the country. I never met.
I was very close with my grandfather when I was like 5.
So maybe that's one reason why it never bothered me or stuck with me. But I remember when it was explained to me basically what being mortal is. That's when I just kind of like. I remember thinking instinctually like, oh, let's come back.
Yeah.
And that's how I've never forgot that. And I was like, well, that's really weird that I would just think that as a kid.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, but again, it's like that instinctual thing. And I also loved another thing too was like when my mom would come in at night and like because I remember I was a pretty open kid. I was a pretty open kid. I was a little shitty, edgy teenager and I'd tell my parents anything. But when I was a kid, I told my parents everything. And when I remember telling my mom like I'm scared of dying, like Grandpa died. Or Papa, because that was what we called him, Papa. Like Papa died, I'm really sad and I don't understand and I don't like that kind of thing. And I was like, where is he? My mom explained heaven to me, but she also because this is something my parents like did. It was, again, they never really gave me straight answers. So like, that was kind of one of the things is like, she didn't say, like, she explained heaven to me, but she also prefaced that she wasn't entirely sure if that was anything at all. You know what I mean? Like, I remember thinking like,
in heaven or not.
But yeah, right. But I remember like my mom always, when we talked about those things, had this kind of level of like uncertainty to her voice. And like, cause my dad was a little bit more on the religious side. My dad was more on like we're Christian. We believe in God and Jesus Christ is our savior. He's died for our sins, that kind of thing. And like even to this day, and I totally respect that. And we have conversations about this stuff all the time and it's totally cool. But like, But he was like, yeah, well, you know, Christian household type thing. But again, my dad was still okay with not waking up early on Sundays, so it shows how devoted he is. Just kidding. Oh no, he'd be so mad if he heard me say that. But my mom, on the other hand, was always like a little bit more of the open-minded one. Like I connected to my mom on a more personal level, but my dad always inspired me because my dad's the guy who always tried to do the big fucking things, like the shoot for the moon, you know what I mean? But at least if you fail, you'll land amongst the stars type of motherfucker. And he always did. Like, I mean, he's like pushing. He's in his 60s, but he's pushing 70. Like, and he's still doing triathlons. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like he's I and, and he's a really good dude, honestly. Just to pat my old man on the back for a second. But like
old man Pat.
But my mom was always the one I'd always great guy. But my mom was always the guy. My mom was always the person I'd always end up like NFL Sundays. Exactly. My dad was way more excited about football than he was about church. I'll tell you that. That is damn true. But you know, he said he'd pray every night, that kind of thing. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Very Protestant Christianity, you know, very very
New Age Christianity.
Very, all you got to do is say sorry and you're forgiven.
Yeah.
Which is really like, okay, Jesus Christ, guys. Which is one of the reasons why I know it's full of shit, because I'm like, they just keep lessening the conditions.
Yeah. Well, as time goes on, it's so much more casual.
Yeah, it's so funny. Even Catholicism's like, yeah, gay people are fine. I'm like, oh, okay, now, okay. Jesus. Anyway, but I mean, it's good. Obviously, progress is good, and progress is progress, baby. If only it could happen a little quicker, if you ask me. But whatever. But that's kind of my thing. Is like I think that and this is where I go back into history, and this is actually good for lore lords in general. But like, because we talked about this on streams a million times, is like the Dark Ages and how I'm of the theory that the Dark Ages set humanity back thousands of years.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, I think that we were onto something, and then somebody wanted to come up with crazy means of control, and then specific religions and commerce ideologies. Not because it's not just religion. You can't just point your finger at one thing. But like the idea for power, wealth, and basically spirituality. Yes, religion again. Those are like the three things that basically took over instead of what we were on the cusp of, I believe. And I think that like, now we're at the time in history where we're kind of coming back to that, because we're having big fights between the new world and the old. And I'm not meaning technology, although technology is pushing that fight a lot. I mean, because like I know people, that's like the first thing a lot of people think of when you talk about like the new age. It's like, oh, technology. No, that's just the weapon that's being used right now. Technology is simply the weapon. Really what's going on is it's the same fight that's always happened. It's just that like there's a fight for power and control, and there's a fight for just people going, let's just accept what's true. You know, like let's accept what's true. Let's accept what we don't know, and let's accept that, you know, like again, that what things aren't. Like again, power and control. Like I remember again, kind of, I can't believe I'm about to make this a pinch political here, but like going to politics for a second, it's just like with like the two-party system, Democrat versus Republican. It's very much in that ideology of control. It's so much easier to control people when it's either or. If we had like an 8-party system, like a lot of other first world countries, like there are countries that have 4-party systems, 6-party systems. They're like, we're the only advanced nation that does the 2-party system, except for China, which does the 1-party. but anyway, but it's pretty fucking wild. You know what I mean? Like that we only have 2 parties that are competing, because it's so much easier to control people when it's these guys are bad. No, these guys are bad. But when it's, well, these guys have a point sometimes, and these guys have a point sometimes, and these guys have a point sometimes, and these guys have a point sometimes, the waters get muddy, and you don't know, and at that point, you don't know what's good or evil anymore. But that's bad for money. You know what I mean? Because money is yes or no. Yeah, money is binary. You're making money or you're not making money. So that's kind of what a lot of these, like, that's one of the reasons why it's like, okay, again, it's used as a control method, but then there's so many people in this country who just go socialist already. Oh, fine. No, I'm not. No, but no, like that. But that's why there's so many like ideologies in this country that really like have started to been coming out. And I mean, if you look at young people, Gen Z and millennials, the most prominent religion amongst us is no religion, or unsure, or like, you know, or not really sure. It's Christianity, and then it's like nothing, and then it's like none. And like I put myself on the nuns list. The nuns, I put myself on those nuns lists. But for real though, I'd put myself on that list as well. Like I don't have one, even though I do, but I don't. It doesn't belong to anybody. I don't have a name for what I believe in. I don't. It's similar to other people's spiritualities. It has a pinch of, you know, Taoism in it. It's got a pinch of astrology and like, you know what I mean, that kind of stuff. It's got a pinch of you know. Dragon Ball Z fucking energy control, you know, but like in a non-mystical point, in a non-fun and cheesy point of view, yes. But like, but I'm not going to call it anything. I
really have to say, this is the wildest story of why you went to Egypt.
Right. I'm sorry, but it comes back to this. It all comes back. I mean, oh, you want to know why I went? If you want to know why, it was because we were. My dad was working on a project in Amman, Jordan, and he was like a water treatment plant because my dad does a lot of work with water treatment plants and stuff. So he went to Amman, Jordan, and he helped out with a project there. And then we just hopped over to Egypt for a little vacation, honestly, and from Jordan. So it was kind of cool. But that's the reason. It was nothing. It was literally just white Americans on vacation, basically. But yeah. But no, like again, I am trying to write this back to the story. This all is relative to the story that you told. I promise. But again, it all comes back down to the idea that we don't understand what consciousness fully is. Like to me, part of me thinks that. Again, this is too simple, that when we all die, our consciousness just gets dumped into a giant pool. Like, you know what I mean? And like, and every consciousness then gets swept together. And that's like what it kind of means to be quote unquote all knowing, is that like, oh, you're now connected to every other consciousness that ever existed. So you're looking at the universe through an all knowing lens, and then when you get reborn again, you're one consciousness again. Fresh to learn new things, and I don't believe in the concept of time the same way that like time is linear, that whole thing. I was like, no, I think that like a cat is learning the universe the same way that a person is, the same way that a rat is, the same way that an ant is, like each little tiny consciousness is still contributing and learning, but once it dies, it gets just added to the pool, and it like that kind of thing. It's kind of like a loose thing. It's very theoretical, but
and then there's a 0.0001% chance that some ancient Egyptian priest that's in that pool leaks out into someone when they're created.
It's true. Yeah, exactly. And like, or the idea that like, because consciousness and energy might be related, and the idea that consciousness is supposed to be wiped clean, and then it's just pure energy, and that's the energy that goes into a newborn. Maybe that energy doesn't always get wiped clean. You know what I mean? Maybe there's still some lingering like old consciousness, and that's what like some people see, is that like it's not like somebody up there in Spiritsville wasn't doing their job, and they ended up it's like, dude, you didn't clean this consciousness. It's now just it's got old ancient Egypt on it. You got to get the Egypt off. You didn't get the Egypt off. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that if we're talking about reincarnation as a possibility, what's best way to put this? You played Assassin's Creed, right, at some point in your life?
Oh, sure, yeah.
So you know how basically the whole plot of that game was like the ancestral DNA theory?
Yeah.
That's a real theory, because there is large amounts of our DNA that are unused, huge branches of unused DNA, and a lot of people think it is possibly memories of ancestors.
Yeah.
There's a lot of evidence to it. I don't know the details. I haven't looked that much into it in my life, but I've seen there's a lot of evidence supporting that theory.
I can give you one piece of evidence because I've read a little bit. It's the idea that once you get into a discipline and you start practicing something, you can genuinely awaken part of your DNA. Because people, and like not just like, oh, your great grandfather was a guitar player, so when you practice, it's a broad thing. It's not necessarily like you're so good at being a fighter and that kind of thing. But there is the idea that like, yeah, that's what that is that like because you have centuries and centuries of DNA inside of you. There's so much knowledge that your family's knew. So that's kind of the idea, is that like if you practice a discipline so long, one of the ways you become a master at it is because you unlock kind of like that extra thing in your body, and then it becomes more natural to you because maybe somebody in your past did something of the sort. Like it's like there's other things that take dexterity, finger dexterity, besides playing the guitar. There's a lot of other things.
So and it could just relate to it in that way. It could come out in that form. But my whole thought was maybe a little girl hits her head in the staircase and it triggers some fucked up ancient memory inside of her that she's actually physically related to.
Yeah.
And it somehow takes priority over her normal life. Maybe because she's so young. Maybe because there's just not enough in there that now this kind of just fills the memory gap. But, the brain doesn't work well enough to like just figure it out right away.
Well, was there ever anything weird about her like living two different lives, or did she basically live her truth throughout her entire life? She lived her normal. She knew something was weird about herself, and then when she had a dream that she was visited by a pharaoh who explained her past life, and then she started remembering things in her past life. It's basically the gist of it. It's just like the whole home thing and the finding the path and finding the garden is kind of the capstone of her past life experience of like, well, I found it.
I'm literally here where I was seeing in a past life as a child in dreams.
Yeah, well, this is where I was taken. This is what happened to me.
She's like 56 at this time, so she's not young, you know. Nope. Like
not anymore.
Yeah, it took her basically most of her life, but she was there and she saw it and she remembered it.
I mean, honestly, this to me does sound like a crazy cosmic accident. It really. Yeah. I mean, like again, there might be scientific explanations, and I'm open to those too because but it's more fun one and to think about it, and two. Again, instinctually, it feels appropriate. You know, it feels like, no, this could be just like a cosmic mistake. Just like, oops, again, we didn't clean the.
Yeah,
we didn't
it
clean
also
Egypt off or something.
Also you're saying appropriate. It fits in the crazy mysticism of fucking ancient Egypt.
Yeah. Yes.
Ancient Egypt is so mysterious and so unknown and so old. It lasted so long, longer than any other civilization.
Oh, big time. Yep.
Like it was just there for thousands and thousands of years.
It was like Mesopotamia, Egypt, all the way up until. Basically,
all the way up until and it stayed Egypt until post Rome in the AD times. Like that was still Egypt, like it was still there.
Yeah,
a lot of things happened, but it held its ground.
I mean, it's still even regarded, but the people there in Egypt even today still like understand where they're from is incredibly special. Like and they treat it that way too. Egypt is a very sought after place.
Yeah, well, especially back in the time, like she discovered, the Nile is a huge deal.
Yep. Oh yeah. Wish for the Nile.
It turns nothing into something. But let's get back to what her life in that temple was after she discovered the gardens. That's the next part we're going to look at.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's very basically just I noted down one one fact that I fucking love is that she befriended a cobra. She had a pet cobra that she would use to fuck with the guards.
That's fucking wild, dude.
Like an actual wild cobra that she found in her office in that temple. And she would feed it. And then it just kept coming back for more food. And then it would follow her around the temple. And when the guards would come up, it would pop its hood and look all aggressive. And she would reach out and pet it and it would calm down.
That's so wild.
Like she legitimately tamed a cobra.
That's so fucking crazy. What a badass.
She also would read out that song she played in the theater group. She would sing it out in the temple at night. And some people would hear her as part of a prayer ceremony she would do. People would find at the feet of the different gods, they would find baskets of beer, wine, bread, and tea biscuits. Which, all things... Tea biscuits, I'm not sure. That's kind of vague. But the other three things are things that I know for a fact ancient Egyptians left as offerings. I'm guessing some kind of like sweet bread or something was used, and she would use... That's what the tea biscuit part is.
Fair.
Because it says traditional offerings of beer, wine, bread, and tea biscuits. A tea biscuits, I don't feel a traditional offering from ancient Egypt.
I doesn't sound like it.
I think it's just a translation of something else. But I actually have a quote for you to read about what she thought life at this temple was like. I'm gonna message you in Discord right now.
Okay.
There it is.
It is like entering a time machine, where the past becomes the present, and the modern mind has difficulty understanding a world where magic is accepted.
That was her view upon living in the temple. Very similar to kind of what you were just talking about.
That is actually pretty wild. That's what I just said.
That's why I wanted you to read that out. That's like what was she? That's kind of what she wrote that in her journal.
Yeah.
That she basically was able to live in this temple and see everything in her past life. Basically, like she could see both versions at once.
Wow.
And no one else believed her. But I say no one else believed her, but I will say everyone else respected her. She had earned so much respect at this time in the field of Egyptology. She was known as one of the greats. Her work at that temple and knowing where things were from her past memories baffled everyone back then, but she was continuously right. That it was just like they just listened to her and she kept finding more stuff. Like this kept happening. She knew what rooms these temples were. She's like, "Oh, this is done for this," and then they would look around and dig more, and like, "Oh, wow, she was right." Like, there's the bath that she said would be there, like that kind of stuff. Wild. But the next part, 1964, she reached the age of 60, and she was faced with mandatory retirement by the Antiquities Department, and she was advised to seek part-time work in Cairo. And she went to Cairo, but she stayed literally only one day until she returned to Abydos to continue her work with or without their support. And she was so stubborn, they're just like, fine, you have 5 more years. So you have to retire, because she just wouldn't leave. So they gave her 5 more years to retire, and when she did in 1969, she worked as a part-time consultant for the department, still living on the area, but she was basically a tour guide at that point. At the temple. She would explain symbolism to people, and the wall scenes that she was famous for uncovering, she would show and explain. In 1972, she suffered a mild heart attack. In the aftermath, she decided to sell her old house that she had, move out of the temple, and build and move into a zariba, which is a small, simple mud brick house, which was built by the son of the keeper of the temple with her. So he instructed her how to make this ancient, like, Egyptian building.
Cool.
And they did it, and she lived in it, and she basically became part of their family. The keeper's family, like her son, the keeper of this temple. I can't find his name anywhere, or his son, but his family with his wife and his 2 kids. Basically, they took her in to live in this mud house on their property, and the kids would call her Grandma Sety. Like it was like she was basically part of the family at that point.
That's nice.
And Sety would live there, and she reported in her diary that when she moved into her new home, Sety the First appeared to her again and carried out the ritual of consecration to make her to bowing fervently towards different statues of Osiris that she had in her house. During the visit, Sety described the one and only time he saw the god Set, which is his namesake. Sety made several visits during the following weeks, which he gave his opinion on basically a lot of things. One of the ones I noted down is this Greek story of Atlantis. She explains as being an island off of what we now know as Turkey, which is crazy that she said that. I didn't even mention in this story how crazy that is, because that's another story I would love to cover one day, is Atlantis, and that is the most believed theory, and that wasn't a research theory until 2012.
Really?
That they found an island off of Turkey that's mostly flooded, and they think that's where it is. That's what Atlantis actually is. And she mentioned that in 1972. So that's a crazy thing.
So she also called Atlantis. So she's like,
yeah,
I can give you all this history about ancient Egypt. This is amazing. This is amazing. Also, there's Atlantis over there.
Yeah, Sety the First in her dreams, like, oh yeah, Atlantis. Like, yeah, I know about that place. It's this place. I showed it to her on a map when he visited as a spirit.
She's like, oh yeah. She's like, what do you think? She was just like, hey, Set, do you want to tell me about Atlantis?
Yes, 100%. That's kind of what she says in her journal. Like, you would have conversations with him. Like, he would just hang out and be like, hey, I'm a ghost. What do you want to know? What's up, dog? And they would just talk for like multiple times. He'd be like, I gotta go now, back. And she'd be like, okay, see you next week. Like, and then the other thing I mentioned is that he explained to her the origin of Osiris. I just noted that down from a mythology standpoint, because it was like it's kind of like a new take on hieroglyphs that she came up with, which is interesting. And during this time, people would visit her. Egyptologists from around the world would come visit her because she was so famous. Yeah. And many people would come and talk to her about her life and her past life. And at this point, it's important to note that she was extremely seriously regarded as an Egyptologist. That film crews and stuff started showing up, talking to her, that kind of deal. People thought she was a bit wacky with her whole past life, but as far as actual scholarly pursuits, she was a legitimate and respected Egyptologist. Yeah. Another note I want to point out here to put her in that field is Ramses II, who was the son of Sety the First. I don't know how much you know about him, but he's one of the most divisive subjects in Egyptology because of the Bible. Right. But she claims knowing him personally in her life as Ben Threshet, and she agrees with the Egyptologist side of things. Where he actually was a good pharaoh, and many people believe there's the Bible version, which labels him as the pharaoh of oppression and the slaughter of baby boys. Right. But there's actually no historical evidence supporting the Bible story of him, but there is a fairly large amount supporting the other side of him. So I just feel like that was important to know, that she supported the historical side, not the biblical side of the story. For someone talking about being reincarnated, you know what I mean? Like,
that's wild.
She supported more with the books than the science books, you know?
Yeah.
She also was part of a Canadian film called The Lost Pharaoh: Search for Ankhetten. Cool. And in this, she also shares her opinion with Egyptologists who did not regard Ankhetten as some romantic figure, who dedicated his life to monotheism, which is kind of what he's written down as in a lot of books. Right. but many Egyptologists at this time changed their tune. And her quote is, Ankhetan is a person of a one-tracked mind, an authoritarian iconoclast who impaled captives and deported populations. And this is from her past life knowledge. That's the description of that.
That's wild.
I don't know how much you know about Ankhetan, but he's kind of like he's a very famous like mummy.
Right. Yeah.
And a lot more recent discoveries of him do in fact support that theory. Again, a crazy thing she kind of called, which
There's
is kind
stuff
of
that's so fucking wild. She's been dead for like 30 years. Like,
yeah, Ankhetan is famous for basically saying your god, the Egyptian gods, are fake and that there's one god. It was one of the earliest forms of monotheism ever. He just thought Ra was the only god, and everyone else was just like his servants. And people really pushed back, and when they did, he killed them or kicked them out of the country. So that's kind of like that's history now. Back then, the very popular writing was because monotheism is the good guys, right? That's how the world sees monotheism.
right. Yeah.
So he was written as this romantic figure who was like the savior of Egypt, but he was actually a horrible, horrible dictator who wanted to just power trip.
Man, it's kind of turning out that monotheism is kind of a bust, huh?
Yeah, as time goes on, it's almost like you shouldn't just do that.
Seems like a bad idea.
And I mentioned these two things just to put forward that she has a very educated opinion on these kind of things, and she's not purely basing it off of like spirituality and past life. Like she has these opinions, but a lot of them are backed by dig finds that she was part of.
Yeah. And probably other history too. Like she consults other people too. I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. She's top in her field. People, they talk all the time, of course. Like she was very in the Egyptology field. In October of 1980, Julia Cave and a team from the BBC arrived in Abydos to film a documentary series called Sety and Her Egypt. And this film featured interviews with multiple Egyptologists, T.G.H. James and Rosalie David, who are both very famous, still alive now Egyptologists. I think they're both still alive. If not, they're recently died. But they're in the 80s, they were young,
Sure.
And they're very big diggers to this day. And this focused on the Abydos excavations and had extensive input from Sety herself, who is in the documentary the whole time and uses crutches to walk around, which is the first show for rapidly deteriorating health.
Yeah.
It was broadcast on BBC Two in May 1981, and I have another thing for you to read, and this is the New York Times review of this film. Almost sent that to the wrong person.
Yeah.
There you go. There's that. This is the New York Times review of Sety, Her Egypt.
An incredulous smile froze on my lips as I watched the chronicle film Sety and Her Egypt. Could I be absolutely positive it was all a lot of eyewash? Of course I couldn't. And neither will you be able to. In any case, it makes marvelous television.
So basically what they're saying in this review is like she talks about her past life, and they're like, well, that could be bullshit, but we can't prove it.
Yeah, that's true.
And that was the American opinion. Like, wow, I guess we can't say otherwise. There's nothing to argue it with. Yeah. And the biggest one, which I actually looked up when I was trying to look up counter arguments, is what you mentioned about the garden thing, is that maybe she looked before,
Sure. Yeah.
But workers at the time said absolutely not. Like, it was solid rock and dirt and sand, and she's 50, she's like 56.
Yeah.
And not a very apparently she wasn't very healthy, like her whole life. She wasn't very in good health. She was always had trouble moving, kind of stuff. So it's like, absolutely not. Like, there's no way she could have dug it and put it back. Like, we would have known, kind of thing.
Sure.
So that was the only, but there's no contrarian reports to this whole story. And the last really bit I have here is, at the time of filming the documentary, an American producer named Miriam Birch asked Sety to appear with fellow Egyptologists Kent Weeks and Lanny Bell in a documentary from National Geographic Channel, which is what I watched, and it's called Egypt: Quest for Eternity. This concentrates on Ramses II, the son of Sety, and has a lot of Sety in it. In fact, I didn't watch the BBC documentary. I did find it, but apparently it's just kind of like all about stuff I already had written down, where this one kind of talks a little bit more about her early life, her reincarnation story, and gives a lot of her scholarly opinions. That's where I got all the stuff I had mentioned up before about her Ramses II Ankhetan stuff.
Right.
That's where I found all that information. And this shooting took place in 1981, coinciding with Sety's 77th birthday party at Chicago House, which is in the movie. And you can tell in the movie she's in a good mood, but she's kind of suffering. Like, she's not good. Like, she's old. She can't really move. Like, she's smiling, but she seems like she's, like, not, all
like she's
there.
In some pain, yeah.
Yeah. The film crew carries her to the top of the Temple of Sety in the movie. And this would be her last visit to the temple, which she believed she served at 3,000 years before.
Yeah.
Sety said, quote, "Death holds no terror for me. I'll just do my best to get through the judgment. I'm going to come before Osiris, who will probably give me a few dirty looks because I know I've committed some things I shouldn't have in this life." Unquote. So Muslims and Christians wouldn't let heathens be buried at their graveyards, and she knew this. So Sety had built her own tomb, an ancient Egyptian style, underground, decorated with a false door and even apparently traps. Statues of Osiris and Isis are both inside. And on April 15th, she received a letter from Olivia Robertson, which confirmed her as an official member enrolled into the Fellowship of Isis, which is an interfaith spiritual movement still around today, focused on worshiping the Egyptian gods and goddesses, focusing on Isis. And then a week later, on April 21st of 1981, Sety passed away in her sleep. And local health authorities would not allow her to be buried in the tomb she constructed. So she was interred in an unmarked grave facing west towards the temple in the desert outside of the Coptic cemetery. And that's the end of her story. Something I thought I could bring up, too, is she has said some other stuff, which has yet to be investigated. She says she knows where Nefertiti is. Which is, I don't know how much you know about Egyptology, but it's like the search for where Nefertiti is like one of the biggest things. Because there's historical records of Nefertiti being mummified and put into a stuff, and we have multiple sarcophaguses, and they're not 100% sure if it's Nefertiti or not.
Right.
But Sety disclosed a quote-unquote most unlikely place, because Sety the First did not like Ankhetan for his attempt to suppress the Egyptian practices, and Nefertiti followed that. I think Nefertiti was Ankhetan's son. And they said they don't want anything more of this family to be known, is what Sety told her in his dream. But he gave her the location of the tomb as being built close to the tomb of Tutankhamun's, which is much closer to a place where anyone has ever looked before. And that area was not in the Valley of Kings, which would make sense because people hated their religious views of the monotheism. So maybe they wouldn't put them with the other pharaohs of old, That's
true.
And the area she described has to this day not been excavated. So maybe one day we'll find it there.
That's pretty wild.
The area very close to it in 1998 was led by an ARPT group, which I don't know what that is. I think it's just an archaeological international team. Sure. It was led by a British man named Nicholas Reeves. They explored the area near Tutankhamun's tomb and found two anomalies. When they used solar sonar sounding equipment.
What the fuck?
And they opened up two rooms which were completely undisturbed from the 20th dynasty. And they found multiple tombs inside those tombs. A radar scan in 2000 was produced to show two more empty chambers, but work was halted. And no one has looked into those unmarked chambers since, so Nefertiti could be down there. In 2006... Otto Shaden, who was on a completely unrelated dig, accidentally burst into one of these anomalies discovered via sonar, and it did contain fine examples of mummification supplies used, but no mummies were found. The latest published is in 2015, published by the same Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves, that he thinks that basically Nefertiti is in that area and is currently still, 6 years later, trying to get the money to make a dig there.
That's pretty wild. I mean, is that not enough evidence to let him dig, or like? It's
just the Egyptian government is so. It's kind of what I was saying. We do a whole fucking episode on Egyptologists now. Yeah. Egyptian government has a written the Department of Antiquities, which is funny because it's who she worked for, has this written timeline of the history of the world, and they don't want it messed with. They don't want it to change, and they're very reluctant to let things. And when there has to be so much evidence and
I hate that.
so many like people writing in to let them do it, that they'll finally let them do it. Have you heard about the Sphinx's paw?
No.
So the Sphinx's left paw is hollow.
Oh.
And there's a staircase underneath it.
Neat.
And underneath that staircase, they think is literally the lost library of Alexandria. And everything that was saved from there, they think is down there, and Egypt will not let them break open the Sphinx's paw to look.
I'm angry about that too.
They have found so many radar dives and sonar dives mapping out that area, and it looks like a literal library. Like, it looks like there's bookshelves full of things. It looks like there's tables. It looks like there's lanterns. Like, that might be the record hall that Egypt kept. That people have been looking for at the Hall of Records forever. There's even a thing I didn't put in the note, but I had it written down in my notes. I didn't put it in my writing, though, that she asked Sety where the record hall was, and he said it's near the Sphinx, but when he was alive, it was something else.
Oh.
And this is way before she would know about sonar technology of underneath the Sphinx's paw.
Right, yeah.
So yeah, that's Egypt. That's basically the end of the story. That's everything I have. But yeah, that's Egyptology in a nutshell. They just don't want progress to be made because it fucks with their understanding of history. It's so stupid.
That's so stupid. That's the whole point of history is when you find out new shit, you're like, oh, okay. Like,
yeah,
that's what I don't understand is why people are afraid of it.
What Soundwave just said in chat is they hate making changes to the lore, which is true. They don't want to change their lore. They don't want to retcon anything. But it's just like, you aren't worshiping these gods anymore. Why do you care? Like, what are you trying? Who are you going to anger? Like, you don't need to. Like, you're good. Just take, like, I get not wanting to damage the Sphinx, but they could. We have the technology how to safely get in there.
Oh, easily.
Like,
that's kind of wild that I was right over that, by the way. Like, I was walked over that area.
Yeah, yeah. Under the Sphinx's, I think it says the Sphinx's left paw is hollow, and it's like there's no door, but
I touched the Sphinx.
But like in that paw, there's a path going down very deep, and people think that's where, when the Library of Alexandria was lit up, that's where they took the scrolls.
Damn. I mean, that would make a lot of sense because it's adjacent. It's not too far away. It's a hidden location.
Also, there's another very famous hunt, like the Mummy and Nefertiti, is the Hall of Records. The Egyptian Hall of Records is something where there's a lot of historical evidence that they kept super, super deep and super, super, like, accurate and descriptive scrolls about their history and their life and how they did everything. Because they had a feeling one day it would fade away, like it did. And no one's found it. But they have writings of it. There's writings of the Hall of Records under the sands. That's what it says. It's like, underground, we have a Hall of Records somewhere, and it's sealed. And that's probably it.
That's
so probably it. Like, it's pretty fucking sealed under that Sphinx.
I'm so mad right now.
Another fun fact that Nefertiti, if you didn't know, is people think it's his face on the Sphinx. Do you know about that?
No.
So the Sphinx didn't have a human face originally. It had an animal face.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
And they carved it off, and one of the pharaohs carved it off to put his face on it. And Nefertiti's people who think it is him or Ankhetan, no one's sure. Because to get rid of the old religion, they had the face carved off. They put their face on it.
Man, these mono fucking motherfuckers need to go eat shit.
In Assassin's Creed Origins, you can go into the Sphinx. I didn't know that.
That's awesome. Well, now I'm convinced that that's definitely true, and we all need to grow up as a people. This goes back to what I was talking to earlier, though, about being set back years and like, I mean, to be honest, I don't know if there's anything in that library besides some details of some personal lives that we can really like figure out. But you know, like we've come really far ourselves this time around.
Yeah,
on the restart of humanity.
Yeah, well, the thing that I feel like it would mostly contribute to everything is just the fact that there's, like, we have a lot of ancient Egyptian history, but we don't have a lot of, like, there's thousands of years missing, you know what I mean? Besides pharaoh names, like, we just don't know. And a lot of pharaoh names are lost. They've found mummies, we don't know who they are. Like, we're not 100% sure who all these bodies are in the Valley of Kings. Because it's just not, it's all written down. The sand, unfortunately, sandstone's not the best material to write something on facing the wind.
Shoot.
So that's all those writing hieroglyphs are completely gone. Like, the Valley of Kings is apparently supposedly 100% written on. Like all the stones had writing on them at some point.
Yeah.
It's all completely gone now.
Man, this makes me want to go back as an adult with my new understanding.
And then we can break into the Sphinx and get killed by the Egyptian police.
Look, if we gotta, it's gonna be a heist. We gotta plan a heist into the Sphinx's paw.
Yeah, they're gonna need some serious tech too, because apparently it's like a 60-foot ladder down or something.
I would not be surprised.
Or like way down to where this record is, and it's like, if there's a ladder there, the second you touch it, it's gone.
Yeah,
It's probably made of wood and just sitting there undisturbed for thousands of years.
It turns to dust the second you touch
Yeah.
it. Like, I mean, what's the likelihood that thing under there is flooded or completely collapsed?
Not because the sonar.
Oh, right.
They map it out with sonar and radar, so they're able to see that. They're able to measure the chasm.
I'm so angry.
But we just got put in a list, MJ.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is just, again, this all backs up everything that we were like kind of talking about. Like, again, this idea that people are stuck inside of like a controlled society as opposed to a more free one that we once had. Like, clearly the ancient Greeks, ancient Egyptians, at some points during the Roman Empire, during earlier times, maybe like there were more, there was something else going on. But then there was like a control shift, basically at zero, at AD, with the switch to AD, shit went down and everything went fire up.
It's CE now. Okay.
All right, sorry.
The Common Era.
I like that more anyway.
It sounds cool. It sounds more fantasy. I like it.
Does.
BCE before Common Era.
Yeah.
Common Era. Yeah. I think ancient Egypt is so fast. I've always been so fascinated by it, just because of how long it lasted. Like a 5,000-year empire.
Yeah, that is absolutely bonkers wild. Oh man. So I'm supposed to be streaming soon, and I'm gonna play some. And I was planning on doing some Zelda, but I'm at that point. And I knew I was going to be if I want to play something else.
Why don't you just join the club
and stream Final Fantasy?
Yeah,
because because I feel like it's gonna be the same shit people have seen over and over and over again. Because people have been streaming the beginning of this game so many times. It's probably the most streamed part.
But we all get to see your reaction to the beginning.
But you said it's not that great.
Still. Also, it's technically even different from Doll Cakes because it's in a different city. But, it's up to you. Whatever you want to do.
Oh, that makes sense. I did go to a different city. I mean, I don't know. We're in Zelda. I forget if we're about to do the Arbiter's Grounds or the Temple of Time.
I'm going to stop my recording here.
Oh, okay. I'll stop mine too.
Yeah.